Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new video. In this video, we are going to continue talking about something that I like to talk about often, and that is learning how to still the mind. Learning how to take the chaos in the mind and calm it down. Because most of us, especially here in the United States, our minds are just going. There is never stillness. And until you have stillness of the mind, you will never come into contact with what I like to call the Archon, which the Archon, ladies and gentlemen, in layman's terms, is the constant chatter in your mind that constantly, in a perpetual rat wheel-like way, just spools through your mind. You see, contrary to what most people think, people talk to themselves constantly. There is an internal dialogue that moves on autopilot. Now, this internal dialogue exists behind what I like to call the curtain of the front of the mind. Those of you who watch my channel, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the front of the mind. The front of the mind is the part of your mind that you use on a daily basis to get mundane tasks finished. You use the front of your mind when you're driving your car from point A to point B. You use the front of your mind when you pay bills, when you shower, when you brush your teeth, when you watch television. There is a specific region of the mind that our daily lives has conditioned to be the dominant part of our mind. The way we live our lives has conditioned our physiology and our brain, you name it, to operate in a very specific way. Now, behind the curtain of the front of the mind, there is, like layers to an onion, multiple different regions of your mind that you normally don't come into contact with when you are operating in the front of your mind. There might be situations where during the day, during a daydream, you slip out of the front of the mind and peek behind the curtain. But more often than not, when you are awake during the day, you are operating in the front of the mind. Now, I call it the front of the mind because the front of something does not normally show you what's behind the front. So when you look at the front of a house, when you look at a door, you can see the front of the house, you can see the door, but you don't see the kitchen, you don't see the bathroom and all of the furniture and decor inside of the home. So the front of our mind, which we use constantly, most people will go the duration of their life only living in the front of their mind until they fall asleep, but by the time they wake up, they won't remember where they were, because sleep is something that we can talk about in the future. We don't sleep properly, and because of that, we don't remember where we were when we were dreaming. So it doesn't really count that you escape the front of the mind while you sleep, because you don't remember it by the time you wake up. And because you don't remember it, you don't consciously integrate the lessons learned when you are traveling through the labyrinth of your mind while you sleep. But where the hell was I going with that? Excuse me, that was kind of a word soup. Behind the curtain of the mind, there's all of this chatter, folks. There's an internal dialogue that constantly moves through our mind, and it projects thoughts into our mind. And we pick up on pieces, bits and pieces of these projections, and they dictate what we think during the day or how we feel. Now, this is a difficult thing to explain, and I don't have much time. I'm going to try to keep this under 15 minutes. I would highly suggest, if you're interested in learning more about these subjects, if you're interested in learning more about cleaning up the mind and accessing the power that lies behind the curtain, so to speak, please check out my Patreon page. There is so much content on that website, ladies and gentlemen. There are, I think, 1,600 posts that you can access immediately if you become a $5 a month member. It's basically like buying me a cup of coffee every month. It's a monthly subscription. You can actually buy, now that I've enabled it, you can buy a yearly subscription. But for $5 a month, ladies and gentlemen, you can access thousands of posts and multiple hours of video content. So I highly suggest that if you're a fan of mine, you become a member, because I talk a lot deeper about these subjects in the videos on my Patreon page. There are multiple hours of new videos that were published this month during November about targeting the chatter of the mind and learning to mute it. Because until you can do that, you're never going to really have peace. And you're never really going to realize that there is a constant dialogue moving through your mind that's affecting how you live your life. I call this the Archon. So based on how we live, based on how we were raised, based on how we learned to interpret the world, we created an internal dialogue, ladies and gentlemen. And this is largely based on the beliefs that we harbor. On top of that, we also have something known as the Archon. How would I explain this? There's two forms of internal dialogue. There's the internal dialogue that you've generated and created, and there's also the Archon. I call it the Archon's influence, which are projected pieces of information that get beamed into the collective consciousness by a negative entity. So again, I want to keep this short. I've explained this in great detail in prior videos. I have multiple videos publicly about this. So if you're interested, please, go and watch those videos. I'll actually post links in the description box below of the particular videos that I have public where I talk deeper about what the Archon is and what its purpose is and why it projects images and emotions and thoughts into our mind. So we have two forms of internal dialogue. We have the self-generated internal dialogue, ladies and gentlemen, that, like I mentioned earlier, it's a byproduct of how we've been raised in this culture and the beliefs that we've created and the shifting of the assemblage point. But then we have the projections of the Archon, the real Archon, into our mind. Now, because we operate in the front of the mind, most people will never, ever know that they have an internal dialogue because they'll learn to misinterpret their thoughts. They'll learn to regard the internal dialogue as their own thinking. And when that happens, it generates the ego. The ego, ladies and gentlemen, is not being cocky. It's not being confident. The ego, the real ego, is the you that gets generated by listening to these thoughts. And they start coming into your mind at a young age, and you learn to identify with these thoughts. And by identifying with these thoughts, you buy into something that is not actually you, and it creates like an alter ego version of you. It's a really big problem. Now, luckily, there are tools that we can use to get our minds back. Magic is one of them. Contrary to what many people believe, magic is actually a system of tools that we can use so that we can experience the full potential of our minds. It's a purging system that we can use. And that's why I talk about it in such great detail on my Patreon page. I think there's 3.5 hours of new content here in the month of November 2020 just on magic and how to practice it. And I also provide you with all the curriculum you need to learn magic, the books. Everything's free. Well, it's not free because it's $5 a month. But for what you get for $5, it's a very small price to pay, in my opinion. And it also supports my broadcast. But there are a handful of tools that we can use to get rid of the Archon's influence. There are also a handful of tools that we can use so that we can locate the internal dialogue that's moving constantly in our minds, and we can change it. We need to delete this internal dialogue. But in order to do that, we have to pull the curtain back that separates the front of the mind from what I like to call the back of the mind. The back of the mind are all the layers of the onion of your mind that you normally don't come into contact with when you're operating in the front. So once you come into contact with what's behind the curtain, you realize that there's all this stuff moving through your mind constantly that prior to you pulling the curtain back, you didn't even know was there. And when the curtain's closed, you don't know it's there, but just because you don't know it's there consciously, that doesn't mean that it's not affecting your life. It's affecting your subconscious. It's affecting your moods. It's destroying your life. So in order to truly wake up, we need a purging system. There's always a purging, ladies and gentlemen. When anyone wants to truly become conscious, you have to purge yourself of what's keeping you from being able to express your full potential. It's just like Yoda says in the first Star Wars film, I think it was the first one, where he's teaching Luke to use the Force. You have to unlearn what you've learned. There's all sorts of crap in your mind that is stuffing your mind to the brim. And because of that, there's no free space. You don't have any emptiness in your mind. And that may sound like a bad thing to say you need emptiness, but emptiness is synonymous with stillness. Your mind isn't supposed to be full of all these projections and worries and guilts and depression and all this bullshit. And as you purge your mind of the contents of your programmed mind, as the stuff gets deleted, you attain wisdom. You see, as you unlearn, you learn. It's not like you have to get rid of all the crap in your mind and unprogram and then, oh, you know, my mind's free, I'm going to go pursue wisdom now. No, as you delete what's plaguing your mind, you grow as a byproduct of it, because you come into contact with that which was plaguing you or keeping you from growing. And once you delete those poisonous attachments to your mind, again, it frees up space and you start to look at reality from a completely different perspective. Your assemblage point starts to move. So again, there's a handful of ways that we can purge our minds, but first and foremost, we need a system that we can use to locate what I like to call the foreign installations of the mind. All the crap that exists behind the curtain of the mind, or the curtain of the front of the mind, everything behind that curtain, these are the foreign installations. And we develop these foreign installations by interacting with the world at a young age without really knowing how to do it. You see, you were never taught how to analyze reality properly. You were never taught at a young age how to have a mind of your own. Before you could even finish playing and having a good time as a child, you were forced into the education systems, which are basically glorified FEMA camps. It's called a re-education camp. These camps teach you how to live in a world of solid objects. They teach you to not be able to see energetic fields around anything. They take you out of the energetic truth of reality. They put you into a world of physical objects, because they start to fill your mind full of beliefs about how the world works, this, that, and the other. And because you're young and impressionable, you take all of that information, break it apart into manageable units, and create beliefs. And we know that beliefs dictate, beliefs feed the subconscious mind information on how to create your reality. So if you don't think that the education that you went through at a young age instructed your consciousness on how to interpret reality, you are in for a rough surprise. And as you deprogram, you'll begin to realize. So as you went in through the education system, you had all this crap stacked on top or into your free mind, and it taught you how to look at reality in a very specific way. And as you accepted all of these ideas and turned them into beliefs, it channeled your awareness to look at reality a certain way, and as a byproduct of that, by default, your assemblage point shifted into a new location. That is largely what is going on in these schools, ladies and gentlemen. They are rerouting the assemblage point and locking it into a new position on a collective level. And that's why by the time you hit high school, everybody pretty much for the most part is the same. People have different interests and have unique, one person might like blue, one person might like green, but for the most part, we're all operating on the same software. The software just has different qualities depending on the person. Now, you can run across some anomalies where the software hasn't completely hacked into the person's neural chemistry and taken them over, but it's becoming rarer and rarer to see these types of people. It takes a considerable amount of effort to wake up here in this matrix. And, one of the things that poses the biggest threat to people when they are trying to wake up is there's a lot of resistance to accepting the fact that you were wrong. It takes an exceptional amount of energy to accept that you were duped. And a lot of people don't want to accept this. A lot of people would rather, whether they're honest with you or not, whether they're honest about it or not, they would rather live a convenient lie than live an inconvenient truth that requires you to change. It's just like in the movie The Matrix, when Cypher says, ignorance is bliss. It is true, because when you're ignorant, you don't have to acknowledge painful things. You don't have to truly realize what's actually going on in the world. That vine is beautiful. I hope that makes sense. So the first thing that anyone interested in becoming conscious needs to do is they need to actually learn to enter into states of consciousness where they can target the foreign installations of the mind. Because until those foreign installations are gone and deleted, the Archon's influence will have you. It's kind of like, again, just I said earlier in the Matrix film, when the script says, Neo, the Matrix has you. What do you think the Matrix is? The Matrix is a system that keeps you enslaved. It keeps you enslaved to an artificial way of living, a false way of living. It throws you into a computer-generated dream world where you learn to interpret reality in a way where you think what you're experiencing is the truth, when in fact, there's a completely different layer to the onion. There's a completely different, reality that is actually going on. But they have you plugged into this system where you identify with your beliefs about reality. You think you know what reality is. You think you know what the purpose of your life is, but do you really know? I'm here to tell you that the world as you know it is much different. It operates in a much different way than you probably expect. But until you can get rid of the narcissistic God complex that most people have, where you think you're right all the time, you will stay locked in this engagement that is dictated largely by the internal dialogue that is running like a perpetual script in the parts of your mind that your conscious mind is not connected to. I hope that makes sense. But how would I explain this? But like an invisible wireless connection beaming information, or how would I say this? The parts of the mind that are behind the curtain of the mind, the forward installations that are afflicting the parts of your mind that are behind the curtain, they project an invisible stream of data into the front of the mind that you learn to identify with, and you think that this internal dialogue that's being projected into your mind, you learn to interpret this as, oh, those are my thoughts. Your thoughts are not your own, ladies and gentlemen. And proof of this is that you can go into states of minimalistic meditation where you can quiet your mind and listen to your thoughts, while at the same time you can create your own thought, asking yourself, what is this? And I really want to try to explain this. When you go into a state of meditation where you try to listen to your mind, you start to realize that there's just this constant stream of thoughts and emotions and appetites. And if you can sit back and observe this stream, that's not you, folks. You've just identified with that stream, and that identification with that stream has literally created who you are, because you listen to it and you think it's you. This is some very serious shit that I'm talking about, and I really do hope that you can hear I don't know how to explain it, the seriousness in my voice, because until you grasp these concepts, you will never truly grow spiritually. I hate to say it, but it's true. What was the Buddha's worst enemy? His own mind. You see, your mind has been set up to work against you. And I'm not trying to scare people or make people live in this worrisome type of reality. I'm trying to give you some tools so that you can change your life, so that you can experience freedom of your mind. We were not designed to identify with these foreign installations. How would I explain it? It would be like you getting into a vehicle and driving down the road and turning the radio on, and whatever's playing on the radio, you thought that was your mind or your own thoughts. That's not how it works. That is not how things work. There are so many things going on in our life that have hoodwinked us, that it is absolutely exponential. And what's funny is you don't hear any of the experts, the quote-unquote experts, talking about this. The scientists and the bigwigs and the college professors. With all the money going into these schools and all this degrees that people get and all these experts, yada, 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 and psychiatrists and psychologists, how is it that none of them have realized that there are artificial fragments beaming into their consciousness, and that they've learned to identify with this stream of nonsense, and that they think that that's their mind? That is insane. I mean, what good are the schools and the experts if they can't even figure out these fundamental principles? So again, it would be like you going into a vehicle turning on the radio, and whatever you heard on the radio, you thought it was you. You thought it was your mind. That's not how it works, folks. Now, the thing is, though, is that the stream of thoughts that constantly moves through our mind, it is usually in relation to whatever is going on in our lives. So I can see how people misinterpret their thoughts, because the genius or the evil of this thing that projects these thoughts into our mind, it projects images and emotions and thoughts based on what we're going through in life. So there's some mind control to this, because it wants you to be duped. So there are power plants, also known as plants of power by Carlos Castaneda. There are certain shamanic tools that we can use. There are certain meditations we can do and rituals that can allow us to, with greater ease, locate, target, and remove these foreign installations. We go into great detail about this on the Patreon page. If you want to learn more, if you want to take this message a little bit more seriously, you can invest. My Patreon page is an investment where you get a handful of educational tools and resources and books, you name it, that you can use to quantum leap in your development. I'm sorry, but a lot of the stuff that I want to talk about, I'm not going to get into on the YouTube channel. I've been censored recently. I've got a community guidelines strike. There are certain things that I'm just not going to talk about here on this page. So if you want to get into the nitty gritty, you can join my Patreon page. I don't care if people think I sound, stingy or whatnot, or that, oh, you're a bad person, you charge money. I offer a service, ladies and gentlemen, and what I've found is that when people pay for a service, they take it more seriously. Whereas if you get something for free, you don't take it as seriously. And that's why I buy every single book. I could get a free ebook online, and if I start reading it and I enjoy it, I'll actually buy the material because I want to support the author. It's just easier to take seriously when you do these things, or when you actually invest. So, some people have no problem spending $600-700 on college course books that are a total ripoff. But $5 a month for a Patreon page? Get real. Get real, folks. So magic in tandem with the use of certain power plants can really help you quantum leap into your development. Doing the inner temple exercise. We've got to learn to question our thoughts. And we do this by stilling the mind with specific meditations, where you try to go into a meditation and not think. When you go into a meditation and try not to think, you come into contact with the internal dialogue. Now, because you're dominated by the front of your mind, and because you were never taught to try to calm your mind down, the authorities never taught you that, you operate in a very specific region of the front of your mind where you don't hear the internal dialogue per se. You hear parts of it, but you don't hear the full scope of it. And again, you learn to identify with this internal chatter. And by identifying with the internal chatter, it takes your spiritual development and just bye-bye, because you're literally identifying with something that is not you. And by identifying with something that is not you, it takes you out of alignment with yourself. And when you're out of alignment with yourself, stress comes into the picture, strife, miscommunications, depression, worry, all this bullshit. When you're actually in alignment with yourself, you're like a boat with its sail set in the right direction. You've got a full crew of good people on deck that are going to help you sail the seas. But if you're not in alignment with yourself, the sail isn't even up yet. You're taking water. There's holes in the boat. You're taking on water, and you're still on the dock. Broken. Learning to mute the Archon's influence is the first step to development. How can you develop in anything in life properly if you have not addressed the fact that you have an internal dialogue running through your mind like a channel on a radio station, and you're learning to identify with the channel. And it doesn't just work in thoughts either, ladies and gentlemen. It projects images into your mind. You might be walking down the road one day with your dog having the greatest time ever, and all of a sudden you have this image of a depressing thought come into, or you might have this depressing image come into your mind of something that happened in the past, and it might cause a chain reaction of emotions that takes you from being up here all the way down here, and then the rest of your day is fucking horrible. It might, on the opposite side of the coin, project appetite into your mind, where all of a sudden you'll be just, I'm feeling good, I haven't eaten anything, I'm blah blah blah, and all of a sudden, boom, you just want a cheeseburger out of nowhere. I do indeed believe that the foreign installations of the mind that have to do with appetite and other particular qualities have to do with the parasites that are in our system. So cleaning up the blood and cleaning up the gut is a great, start to this, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why, especially on my Patreon page, I have step-by-step guides on how to parasite cleanse properly, safely, easy, effectively, and economically. I teach you how to do all these things. We deworm our animals every year. We don't deworm ourselves, though. Ourselves. You think about how ridiculous that is. We deworm our pets every year, but not ourselves. What do you think? That you're living with the pet? It's licking its ass near you when it lays next to you on the bed. You don't think when your cat gets out of the cat box after it takes a shit or a piss, and it steps on that stuff, and when it jumps on your lap, and then you touch your lap unknowingly, and then eat your food without washing your hands, you don't think that you might get parasites from that? I have tons of proof from my own experiments on the fact that parasites are real. I've gotten rid of a handful of them. I believe that these parasites, to some extent, have a synonymous, it's weird, I don't really know how to explain it, but they have some type of relationship to the foreign installations of the mind. And what's interesting is that if you read the Essene Gospel of Peace, Book 1, Jesus goes on to teach the people that he's trying to teach how to heal that the true Satan are the worms in your gut, because they control the mind. That's literally what is said in the Essene Gospel of Peace, Book 1. I have a copy of that for free for my patrons in e-format on my Patreon page. So if you want to read that, check out my page. I created something known as the Library of Strength and Wisdom. It's going to be frequently updated, and there's all sorts of material on there right now where you can download these books. But I found that really interesting, that in the Essene Gospel of Peace, Book 1, and in fact, throughout the entire 4-part series, Book 1 and Book 4 has the most parasite content in it, where Jesus tells the disciples, if you will, or the people, that he's trying to teach how to heal themselves. He goes on to say that the real Satan is the worms inside of your gut, and he shows that after he heals these people of these giant tapeworms, he goes on to explain it in great detail. He actually ends up pulling a worm out of a sick person's mouth with the use of warm milk. People actually do this, believe it or not. But it ends up crawling out of the individual's mouth towards the steam of warm milk, as Jesus holds this cup of warm milk above this mouth, or below this man's mouth, after he fasted on water for a prolonged period. The worm was so hungry that it actually crawled out of the man's mouth towards the warm milk. I believe it was milk. There might have been some milk and honey. I'm not 100% sure. But he goes on to say that after the worm left this man's mouth, and all the people that he'd healed, their mind, their sanity began to come back. And what does Jesus say throughout the Bible? Bring all thoughts into captivity. Remove all there's all sorts, of references throughout the Bible in multiple different religious texts about the importance of getting the mind empty. And throughout the Bible, if you read it with a little bit of, and if you don't read it so literally, there's multiple parallels to what Jesus is saying about Satan and the internal dialogue. What does Satan say? I cometh into the world to deceiveth everybody? Something like that? Well, how do you get deceived? What is the greatest form of deceiving? by getting people maybe to think there's something that they're not and to learn to identify with that. People are being deceived into believing that their thoughts are them when they're actually not. And you end up living an entire life thinking that the script that you're hearing in your mind and your emotions and in your other bodies of your energy field, you've learned to believe that that's you. That is the true ego. It's the formation of the false self. I'm going to wrap this one up, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching this video. And again, if you want to learn more, you've got to check out my Patreon page. My Patreon page is like an expansion pack to this channel. And it's the scholarly part of this channel. It's the aspect of this channel that you invest in if you're serious about taking your education with this channel to the next level. This channel, the channel is, I talk about a lot of things, but if you want to go into the academy, if you will, or the schooling aspect of this channel, you go onto the Patreon page. So there's a lot to share. We're going to get into a lot more here on the YouTube channel, on my Patreon page, and on my website. My website's down right now, ladies and gentlemen, but please mark down www.sacredhealingtools.com, because I don't know if I'm going to be deplatformed. Who knows how long I'll be here on YouTube, but there will always be a way for you to access my materials online, because regardless of the censorship, I am going nowhere. And until next time, peace be with you.